Okay, welcome back, Pre-AP Scorps. Today we're going to be talking about chapters 9 and 10 of a separate piece, and the chapter begins with 9. Jean is reflecting on the fact that Phineas has this fantasy-like conspiracy theory that World War II doesn't exist, and there are a bunch of fat old men who, after the Roaring Twenties and then the Great Depression, they needed to do something to maintain their sense of power and their wealth. So they had to cook up some kind of a strange thing that can keep them, as Finney puts it, with all the best steaks and all the best access to everything. And with that, interestingly enough, they talk about how Mr. Ludsbury obviously is left out of it because he's too thin. So he's not part of the club. So anyway, Gene doesn't necessarily buy into it, but he also realizes that what could it hurt to entertain Finney's fantasies, and he's driven by guilt. Now what's really interesting is the first page of the chapter already talks about the enlistment of Leper. And Leper is going to be the focus of these two chapters in our lecture. And if you, again, you just think of his name, Elwyn Lepellier, nicknamed Leper. He obviously is not aggressive. He doesn't play blitzball. He doesn't want to deal with manual labor and tough, difficult work like the shoveling out of the troop trains. So he goes to cross-country ski and find a beaver dam and hopefully sketch the beaver dam and see the beaver. So this is the first kid from Gene's class to enlist. And a quote to Leper, it revealed what all of us were seeking, a recognizable and friendly face to war. Skiers in white shrouds winged down virgin slopes, silent as angels, and then realistically herringboned up again. And then he talks about nothing tainted these white warriors of winter as they swooped down their spotless mountain sides, and this cool, clean response to war glided straight into Leper's Vermont heart. So Leper's excuse to the boys on why he had this about face and all of a sudden wants to go into war is, he says, everything has to evolve or else it perishes. And that is a really, really significant thing when thinking about World War II. World War II, obviously there was a draft, and it's the idea of everything evolves or else it perishes has to do with self-preservation. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you enlist, you can choose your service. And if you choose your service, hopefully you can choose a non-combat service if you're like Leper, in which way you're probably going to be inconvenienced a great deal by things you have to learn and things you have to do, and maybe even some things you have to see, but you might not have to fight on the front lines. However, if Leper is drafted, he has no control over that. So that's a very significant part early on in the chapter. So Leper says, I'm going to enlist in these ski troops, and a week later he was gone. Now, while Leper is gone, the boys really try to send him positive energy. And the positive energy they're trying to send him has to do with any advancements in the war, battles that are won, anything that makes the headlines. The boys start saying, oh my gosh, that was Leper. The Tunisian campaign became Leper's liberation. Then they talk about the torpedoing of the Scharnhorst. At it again. Leper on the road to Burma. Leper's stand at Stalingrad. Leper's convoy to Archangel. So all of these different kinds of things, they talk about how, Lepellier is changing the very course of history. The boys they're rooting him on. They're worried for him. They're concerned for him. And he's in absence now. Okay, so in addition to Leper leaving and Phineas saying that the war doesn't really exist, there's also Gene's training for the Olympics of 1944. And like we talked about in chapter 8 with Gene kind of understanding, oh, I'm not going to enlist now that Finney's back. His attitude is, well, I'll play along with these Olympics. I'll train for them, because the worst thing that's going to happen to me is I'll get in really good physical shape. And he knows he's going to need to be in good physical shape for when he goes off into, I don't know if they called it basic training during World War II. You might want to look into that. If you find anything out, let me know. But there was obviously some sort of a training that took place, and I'm pretty positive it was fairly physical. So Gene was considering and thinking about that. Okay, now the talk has been war, enlistment, and leper. And Phineas, if you notice, he doesn't go to the butt room. He tries to prevent Gene from going, obviously because of Gene's lungs, and if he's going to be training for the Olympics. But the reality is, Finney doesn't want to be involved in talk about war if he's not participating in the war. He doesn't want to be around it. He doesn't want Gene to be influenced by it, because he doesn't want Gene to leave. He doesn't want Gene to enlist. And he doesn't necessarily want to admit to that, because there's sort of a loss in status in doing so. So Phineas talks about this thing called the Winter Carnival. And it's brought up, well, there's no Devon Winter Carnival. There never has. And Finney's like, well, there is now. And he starts talking up the different events and the different bits and pieces of this carnival that's going to be going on. And Brinker is going to be a part of the planning along with Gene. And they're all going to put this thing together that's going to give them a break. Now, again, you might say, well, what do they need a break from? You live in Florida, it's the winter time, and you don't know it. There are flowers blooming, the trees are green, sky is blue. But up north, if you've ever lived up north, especially in the Northeast, there's a thing, they call it the winter blaz. And there's also, I think they call it sad, where it's something about like, it's a weather or environment, seasonal something depression. It's like weather-induced depression. But the thing that I remember living up north, they used to call it the winter blaz. And the winter blaz were when you were trapped inside. It got dark before you even ate dinner at night. So it wouldn't be uncommon for you to get up at 7:30 in the morning. It's dark. It's gray, cloudy, cold all day. And then let's say you're going to eat dinner at 6 o'clock at night. Well, it would have been dark by 5 o'clock. And it's like that for months at a time. The trees, like the oaks you're looking at right now, they're just brown sticks. They've gone dormant for the winter. It's just a time when everybody is just really over their living situation. Kids, they don't necessarily experience this so much because they associate snow with sledding and snowmen and forts and snowball fights and all of that. But when you start to get older, you feel the blaz. And the boys at the Devon School are definitely feeling that. And Phineas wants to break it up by having this carnival. I could recall friends of mine when I lived in Maryland. They used to have a thing called the Winter Blaz. It was like a Jimmy Buffett party. And this one family actually went to Lowe's and got sand and put it all in their garage. And they had a tropical themed party where you had to wear like bathing trunks and a Hawaiian shirt. And they played Jimmy Buffett music. And this was in February. When outside it was probably like 18 degrees. So anyway, to reaffirm that whole blaz thing, into the chapter a little deeper, it says the Saturday was Battleship Gray. And with that, probably the most significant thing being the way he characterizes the color, again, having a lot to do with war. Okay, so the boys have a bunch of different prizes. I'm not going to get into those. They have a bunch of different events. I'm not going to get into those. But they're playing, they're having fun, and they're taking a break from everything that is the reality of the war, the reality of what might be happening with leper, all of those sorts of things. And as the chapter comes close to the end, probably the most significant passage of the book comes up. And I'm just going to read it to you. It's about probably 20 lines, maybe 25 lines from the end of the chapter. So whatever version you have if you want to look. And it says, "It wasn't the cider which made me surpass myself. It was this liberation we had torn from the gray encroachments of 1943. The escape we had concocted this afternoon of momentary, illusory, special, and separate peace." Now I want you to think about that, because anytime the title of a book comes up, obviously there's some significance to it, and we finally get that title of the book. The word peace was probably used 100 times by this point, but now we get the separate peace. So the boys were drinking hard cider, and Gene is acknowledging that we weren't intoxicated so that we felt this way. He calls it a liberation. So it's a freedom, and if you notice, he tore, or they tore, the liberation, as if to say they took it. It wasn't theirs. From the gray encroachments, i.e. the war of 1943, which, he calls it an escape. And it's a momentary, short period of time, illusory, not real, special, separate peace. So a separate peace basically means a last opportunity to be carefree and innocent prior to the war destroying all of it. And that is really the essence of this whole book. It's entirely a story of loss of innocence. They call it a Bildungsroman. You'll learn about that in AP Literature in 12th grade. Bildungsroman, if you want to Google it, look it up. And that concludes the chapter with a telegram. And the telegram is from Leper. And what's so interesting is Phineas is pretty much saying, "A telegram! Gene, a telegram! It's the Olympic Committee. They want you. Read it aloud. Read it aloud." The boys are just completely excited and just, they're having a lot of fun, carefree moment. It's read aloud. "I have escaped and need help. I'm at Christmas location. You understand. No need to risk address here. My safety depends on you coming at once. Your best friend, Elwyn Leper Lepellier." Christmas location, I mean, where do you go at Christmas? You go home. Leper is at home. He escaped. Well, I'm sorry, you don't escape from the military. AWOL, absent without leave, is what they call it, but I seriously doubt Leper went AWOL. And that closes out the chapter, and if you notice how momentary that separate peace was. They were having the time of their lives, and something had to break it up. And what broke it up? Reality of war. So now we get into chapter 10, and Gene goes to visit Leper. And when he's going to see Leper, a couple things are very significant. One is the weather. Gene notices that the weather is assaulting his face. He is walking into a heavy, cold wind, yet the sun is caressing the back of his neck. So he is leaving that separate peace to go into face a reality of war. When he gets to Leper's house, there are high-back chairs again. High-back chairs forcing you into a posture of righteousness. And when he sees Leper, he notices that he's got this nervous twitching. He's got these little spasms. And when he sees it, he immediately turns against Leper to protect himself. Gene thinks to himself, "Fear seized my stomach like a cramp. I didn't care what I said to him now. It was myself I was worried about. For if Leper was psycho, it was the army which had done it to him, and I and all of us were on the brink of the army." And Gene basically just goes off on Leper, and he kicks him out of his chair, and he calls him a bunch of names. And the most significant part of all of that is Gene is acting in his own self-preservation. Now, why is Gene so worried? Why is he so nervous? Why is he almost ill at the sight of Leper and Leper's change? Well, Leper never even made it out of that initial training period. He never made it long enough to even go overseas. Something happened with Leper where he cracked. More than likely, based on what Leper expressed, because there wasn't a whole lot he gave, he wasn't eating the food, he wasn't getting much sleep, and he was being put through a lot of physically demanding activities and very mentally stressful things, probably shooting guns, practicing hand-to-hand combat, those sorts of things. And for Leper, it was all too much. The combination of all of it, it made him snap. He had a nervous breakdown. So what Gene is thinking is, if Leper... Sorry, my phone rang. What Gene is thinking is, my gosh, if Leper didn't even make it to the war and he is this affected by it, how are we, or how am I, because Gene, a lot of it is I, me, my. So what does Gene do? Instead of saying, my gosh, Leper, I'm so sorry about this, it's okay, we'll stay in touch, call me on the phone, whatever. No, instead of doing something that a true friend would do, Gene takes it all personally, calls him a stupid, crazy bastard. And by the end of it all, Leper's crying. Leper's mother is super upset. And Gene goes back to Devon feeling even more uncomfortable about things because he's lashing out uncontrollably at nothing that deserves that kind of a treatment. He gets back to Devon, and he does not want to talk about Leper. He does not want to even think about Leper. He's worried about himself. I'm going to read the last paragraph of the chapter, and it said, I turned around and began a clumsy run across the field in a line which avoided his house and aimed toward the road leading back into town. I left Leper telling his story into the wind. He might tell it forever. I didn't care. I didn't want to hear any more of it. I had already heard too much. What did he mean by telling me a story like that? I didn't want to hear any more of it. Not now or ever. I didn't care because it had nothing to do with me, and I didn't want to hear any more of it ever. You talk about being egocentric. If you count the number of times Gene uses I or me, it's significant. So that is the end of chapters 9 and 10. I unloaded a lot of information on you, almost a 20-minute long lecture, and I know there are some things that I'm mentioning and talking about that you either didn't see or didn't think about. So your assignment for Thursday going into Friday, I want a reflection on something new you picked up on from the lecture, okay? Then what I would like you to do is I would like you on Friday to read chapter 12. I'm sorry, read chapter 11. I'm getting ahead of myself. Read chapter 11, and I will give you a question for that at some point tomorrow. So I hope everybody's doing well. I still can't believe that this is the way we're having school now, but you know, it is what it is. A lot of you expressed to me that you're not very happy with it, and I want to let you know I feel exactly the same way. Yeah, miss you guys. Hope you're doing well, and we will be in touch. Have a good day.